The Many Faces of Don Quixote. I have some things I hope you'll like, some things you probably won't, but we can try. All different sorts of things going on with this today. First, Don Quixote is the classic example of what Mark Twain said a classic was, a masterpiece that nobody reads. But it's wonderful stuff, and we think we know a lot about it. We have a sense of who Don Quixote is. We know him when we see him. So what I want to talk with you about today is not just Don Quixote as the literary character, but different media into which he has been translated, and some of the reasons I think why. Because he has been a successful character for a very long time. You probably know that Don Quixote Part 1 was immediately successful. It was followed up years later by Part 2. And just to give you a sense of historical context, Miguel Cervantes was a contemporary of William Shakespeare. He led maybe a bit more eventful life than William Shakespeare did. Cervantes was variously a soldier, he was a civil servant, he was a public official, he was in and out of jail from time to time, and lived a very, very eventful life, and did a whole lot to establish the Spanish theater. It's a marvelous period, because Cervantes is not alone. We also have Lope de Vega there, we have Calderón de la Barca, and all these wonderful, wonderful plays that were developing simultaneously with the Elizabethan tradition and have a lot in common with them in terms of structure and in terms of how they were produced. But Cervantes wrote the book, and it was immediately successful. And what's difficult for us, I think, is the idea was that this was kind of going to be a satire. We're going to kind of, sort of make fun of our culture and the way things are done around here, and we're going to do it in the context of this crazy guy who thinks he's a knight. What has in fact happened, I think, is we really like Don Quixote. So we don't really want him to be an instrument of satire. We want him to be the guy he is. And what's happened is over the years, this process of romanticizing this character. We like him. We sympathize with him. He's totally committed to what he's doing. And so I think we like to stop there. And some presentations of Quixote's story have in fact stopped there. To begin in the visual arts, we start with Gustave Doré. You may not know his name, but you certainly know his work. Gustave Doré was one of those influential illustrators whose work has done a lot to shape our perceptions of things. His illustrations of the Bible were hugely popular. You've doubtless seen some of his illustrations for Dante's Inferno, and his work for Don Quixote, which was done in the 1860s, is similar. Much of what we know about Don Quixote is based on what Doré showed us. The basic physiognomy, the basic physical stature, very tall, very gaunt, with that big old long beard, it comes right from Doré. This is one of my favorites, because look at all of the fantasy and the figures swirling around him as he brandishes his sword while reading his book. It's just a classic image. So to begin with Doré's work, just a few more of his etchings. This is Don Quixote and his faithful squire, Sancho Panza. For those of you keeping score, if ever there was anybody who most of the time wished that he was somewhere else, it's Sancho Panza. And yet Sancho is one of these wonderful guys who gets it. He understands, and he knows what he needs to do to try to sort of keep Quixote going, keep his dream alive. And it's Sancho who's there with him at the end for all his threats and wanting to go home, and the fact that he never does get an island to be the governor on. He's still there right till the very end. So here they are, off in search of adventure. If you don't know, and I apologize if I'm insulting your intelligence, Don Quixote repeatedly refers to himself as a knight errant, E-R-R-A-N-T. It's the same root word as error, which is not so much a mistake as a wandering off. So that's what a knight errant does. A knight errant is a wandering knight who goes through the world, righting wrongs, finding adventure, doing the things that need to be done. So they're not attached to a particular court. They're out all over the place. And that's what Don Quixote does, is he goes out in search of adventures, and he finds them. Most notably, the adventure of the windmill. Let me share just a moment of this with you. if you're unfamiliar. At this point, they came in sight of 30 or 40 windmills that there are on the plain, and as soon as Don Quixote saw them, he said to his squire, "Fortune is arranging matters for us better than we could have shaped our desires ourselves, for look there, friend Sancho Panza, where 30 or more monstrous giants present themselves, all of whom I mean to engage in battle and slay, and with whose spoils we shall begin to make our fortunes, for this is righteous warfare, and it is God's good service to sweep so evil a breed from off the face of the earth." "What giants?" said Sancho Panza. "Those thou seest there," answered his master, "with the long arms, and some of them have nearly 2 leagues long." "Look, your worship," said Sancho, "what we see there are not giants, but windmills, and what seem to be their arms are the sails that, turned by the wind, make the millstone go." "It is easy to see," replied Don Quixote, "that thou art not used to this business of adventures. Those are giants, and if thou art afraid, away with thee out of this, and betake thyself to prayer, while I engage them in fierce and unequal combat." So saying, he gave the spur to his steed Rocinante, heedless of the cries of his squire Sancho sent after him, warning him that most certainly they were windmills and not giants he was going to attack. He, however, was so positive they were giants that he neither heard the cries of Sancho nor perceived, near as he was, what they were, but made at them, shouting, "Fly not, cowards and vile beings, for it is a single knight that attacks you." A slight breeze at this moment sprang up, and the great sails began to move. Seeing which, Don Quixote exclaimed, Though ye flourish more arms than the giant Briareus, ye have to reckon with me." So saying, and commending himself with all his heart to his lady Dulcinea, imploring her to support him in such peril, with lance in rest and covered by his buckler, he charged at Rocinante's fullest gallop and fell upon the first mill that stood in front of him. But as he drove his lance point into the sail, the wind whirled it round with such force that it shivered the lance to pieces, sweeping with it horse and rider, who went rolling over on the plain. In a sorry condition, Sancho hastened to his assistance as fast as his ass could go, donkey. And when he came up, found him unable to move, with such a shock had Rocinante fallen on him. "God bless me," said Sancho, "did I not tell your worship to mind what you were about, for they were only windmills?" "Hush, friend Sancho," replied Don Quixote. "The fortunes of war, more than any other, are liable to frequent fluctuations. And moreover, I think, and it is the truth, that same sage Friston, who carried off my study and books, has turned those giants into mills, in order to rob me of the glory of vanquishing them. Such is the enmity he bears me. But in the end, his wicked arts will avail but little against my good sword." So it doesn't matter what happens to him. He's got a reason. He's got a justification. I got to tell you, there are so many times in this book where Don Quixote is just flat on his back, talking, philosophizing. He can't move, explaining his situation. He is beaten. His horse falls on him. He's imprisoned. He has his teeth knocked out. He has a wild time. I'm surprised he survives to the end. But this, the adventure of the windmills, has become kind of the most famous of them. This is 2 pictures by Doré. You see him being swept up by the sail, and then you see the aftermath as he and poor Rocinante. You talk about a long-suffering animal, both laying there on the ground. And other artists have tried their hand. Different historical periods, different styles. And then there are other adventures that are popular, but maybe not as popular. This is the adventure of the sheep. Don Quixote and Sancho are riding along, and they see these clouds of dust. And Don Quixote imagines them to be 2 great armies which are coming to engage each other. And he stands there with Sancho, counting off each knight and his arms and his parentage and his country. And Sancho's like, it's a bunch of sheep. And what Don Quixote ultimately does is decides to take sides in this conflict and goes riding into the midst of the flock with his lance. And he makes off with 3 or 4 of them. And the shepherds, whom you see over here, begin pelting him with rocks from their slings and from their hands. And that's where he takes one up beside his head to kind of knock some of his molars out. Prior to this adventure, we found that Don Quixote has this magic medicine that he can make. And what it does is he takes it, and it's a purgative. So basically, he takes his medicine, he throws up, and he feels better. Well, Sancho tried it, it gave him a headache. So as Don Quixote and Sancho are lying about after the adventure with the sheep, this is why some adventures are better remembered than others. All right. But go not just yet, for I want thy help and assistance. Come hither, and see how many of my teeth and grinders are missing, for I feel as if there was not one left in my mouth. And he's already drunk his medicine for his pain. Sancho came so close that he almost put his eyes into his mouth. Now, just at that moment, the balsam had acted on the stomach of Don Quixote, so that at the very instant when Sancho came to examine his mouth, he discharged all its contents with more force than a musket, and full into the beard of the compassionate squire. "Holy Mary!" cried Sancho. "What is this that has happened to me? Clearly this sinner is mortally wounded as he vomits blood from the mouth." But considering the matter a little more closely, he perceived by the color, taste, and smell that it was not blood, but the balsam from the flask which he had seen him drink. And he was taken with such a loathing that his stomach turned, and he vomited up his inside over his very master, and both were left in a precious state. That one doesn't get illustrated very often. The adventure of the sheep, there they are being pelted again. Just in the interest of full disclosure and full coverage, those of you in the audience of a certain age who grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood will remember that there was another place that they visited from time to time, and it was called Someplace Else. And in Someplace Else lived, I wish I had a better picture. This is Don Quixote. Donkey is actually a donkey who lives in that windmill back there. So Mr. Rogers is giving us all sorts of wonderful sort of literary allusions that we didn't even realize at the time. But Don Quixote. Moving from the illustration page to the fine arts, the visual arts. Lots and lots of artists and lots of different media have attempted Don Quixote. And what we will do this afternoon is skim lightly across the surface and touch a couple of these. I hope that perhaps it will spur your interest to go and see some more. This is none other than Picasso. You've probably seen this one. It's very popular poster art. But this is Picasso's rendering of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and you see the windmills all scattered around in the back. Those of you who are comics fans may know the work of Will Eisner. The Spirit is his most famous comic book, and that's his version of Don Quixote. I love the monogrammed shield over there. Howard Pyle, famous American illustrator whose work you may know. Here's Don Quixote being taken out by the windmill. On no less than 4 separate occasions, Disney Studios has tried to make Don Quixote into a film. And there are attempts at development and art is done, but for some reason or other the project never quite gets off the ground. These are a couple of concept pictures for what Don Quixote would look like as a Disney feature. I particularly like the mustache on the one up there. My favorites here, look at this watercolor over there. Isn't that great? The windmills. Isn't that terrific? So anyway, maybe they'll pull it off one of these days. But again, another visual representation of the character. Dr. Stebbins will recognize this. In the city of Guanajuato in Mexico, there is a museum completely devoted to Don Quixote. It's the Don Quixote Iconographic Museum, and this is it from the outside. It's all paintings, sculpture, all sorts of different things related to Don Quixote. Just down the street from the childhood home of Diego Rivera, the great mural artist. Here's the courtyard inside, this marvelous sort of weird kind of Easter Island Don Quixote going on over here. This one kind of looks like Treebeard. And then these are the sculptures that meet you as you come in the door. There's sculpture and there's painting. I particularly want to draw your attention to this one here. This is very large, but here's Don Quixote amidst nuclear explosions. So the character has been reinterpreted over the years as standing against all sorts of powers, all sorts of things that are bigger than we are. Sticking it out, doing his best, fighting for his honor and for what is right. This is an installation in the midst of the museum, where Don Quixote, and here you see him close up, Don Quixote is here reading his book, and you can walk in here and stand next to him, and arching over him are the things that he's reading and all the images in his mind. So you've got all these different sorts of media, all these different sorts of interpretations of the same character. This is the work of Octavio Ocampo, if you're interested, and there are lots of these. It's several of these portraits of Don Quixote, but if you look closely, you see all sorts of other things going on in here. On the one on the left, the two eyes are Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and the windmill is behind them. And you see a lot of different incidents from the stories in these different pictures. Again, it draws you in. It makes you see more and more than you thought you were going to. Now, speaking of many faces, we're going to talk about several of these, and I have some clips I want you to see too, just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Many faces of Don Quixote. We will discuss this one and that one and that one in just a second. Rex Harrison, once upon a time, you may know him from My Fair Lady, you may know him from Dr. Dolittle. Rex Harrison was supposed to have played Don Quixote in a made-for-television version. He did in the BBC. He was supposed to be the star of Man of La Mancha when that musical was being developed. But everybody said, okay, Henry Higgins was one thing, but Don Quixote is something else. And so he never did make that one. Above him, though, is a singer. You, of course, recognize the famous Russian basso profundo. His name is Fyodor Shalyapin. And Shalyapin I'll mention in a moment as we listen to some of the opera that Massenet wrote based on Don Quixote. I will say this, if you know a movie called The Name of the Rose, or a movie called Moonstruck, his son Theodore Shalyapin Jr. was in those. But Shalyapin was a very famous performer. There's a marvelous history of the opera as it was done at the Metropolitan, and the commentator in the book refers to him exclusively as a ham, tastelessly overacting. He would finish an aria, and as the applause was dying, he would come down to the orchestra pit and tell the conductor where to go back to, so he could do it again and get applauded again. All right? So, Massenet, I'll tell you that's getting ahead of myself. Richard Kiley is the one who did play Don Quixote in the original production of Man of La Mancha. Won a Tony Award for it, amazing performance. Over here in the top is Peter O'Toole, who made the film version of Man of La Mancha, which is one of those reasons as growing human beings to sort of revisit things from time to time. Because the first time I saw that movie, I thought it was the worst thing I ever saw. There's no good casting in it, except for Sophia Loren, who could read the phone book and I would pay attention. But since then, I've gone back and looked at some of the scenes and preparing for this afternoon, and it's really pretty good. It's really pretty good. It hits all the right notes and has all the right moods and atmospheres. And this, of course, is our dear John Lithgow, who did a made-for-TV version of Don Quixote, and we'll watch a little bit of that in just a second, too. All right, first, though, Jules Massenet. Jules Massenet was an important French opera composer in the mid to late 19th century, and his last great hit was Don Quixote, and Shalyapin was the star. It is unusual, for those of you interested, it is unusual in having two male leads who are basses. Basses are usually the bad guys, and the tenors are the good guys. And there are tenors, but both Don Quixote and Sancho are basses. And what really annoyed Massenet about Shalyapin is when they got together to hear the score, and Massenet was playing it on the piano, and Shalyapin was there listening, just sobbing, just, so beautiful. And Massenet's like, really? All right, calm down. It's going to be okay. So he never was that impressed with him, but it was a hit for Shalyapin, and it was a hit for Massenet. Okay. This is a fairly modern production, and the horses do appear, as I'll show you in just a moment. So you see Rocinante is just basically skeletal, with Don Quixote sitting there. Sancho appears to be using his donkey for an ironing board. This I love. There's Don Quixote, there's Rocinante, who looks like a carousel horse. And look at the guys he's with. In this opera, Don Quixote falls in love with Dulcinea from a distance, expresses his love for her, and she, thinking he's just a witty and charming kind of goofball, sends him off on a quest to get a pearl necklace that was stolen from her. Well, he goes and gets it. And he winds up in this band of thieves who you see here are all gangsters here with machine guns and stuff. And they are so impressed, and this is the romanticization, dear hearts, they are so impressed with his commitment and his passion and his earnestness, that they give it to him. They give him the necklace to take back to her. She then is forced to politely, say, I can't marry you. And he dies. It's an opera. What are you going to do? All right, so before we talk about Marius Petipa, let me get out of here. All right. The name of the opera is Don Quixote, because that's French. Okay? We're coming in just on the end of a Sancho Panza aria where he's been complaining about the life he's forced to live, and this is just coming up to the windmills. And I want you to see how difficult it can be, because this will probably strike you as a little odd, but there we go. All right, so we'll turn it on. Full screen.
Regarde, quoi, homme de peu, regarde, quoi, mais quoi? Sancho, en garde, en garde, en garde! Quoi, la voix se dresser dans le fond?
I must say, I do love that the subtitles are the same language that you're listening to. I don't quite understand. Moulin, mill. Those are mills.
C'est les géants qui dans leur ordonnance tentent de m'arrêter, voler leur insolence. Je vais les châtier au fatal dimanche.
Poor crazy man.
Pour recommencer.
Giant, monstrous knights. There goes his horse. I will do this the exalted knight. This is where it gets a little awkward. The radio control horse. Second act. All right. Jules Massenet. Marius Petipa was a choreographer and a master ballet instructor and largely responsible for the classical Russian ballet. And he made a Don Quixote, which is really kind of worthy of our attention. 1869 was when his opened, and I'm just going to tell you right now, it's basically an excuse to have a lot of dances which are completely unrelated to anything that Cervantes wrote. Okay? We begin in the village square where there's a festival. Oh, okay, we all have to dance. And I could play Don Quixote in this, by the way, because he does a lot of this. You know, he just kind of walks around looking very, very regal. Enamored of the innkeeper's daughter, thinks she's Dulcinea, one thing and another. What happened at the end of this one is, Petipa, at least originally, and music is by Minkus, it's still in the repertoire, had him die at the end of it, which was, 2 years later they revised it and went, wait a minute. And it's one of those examples I'm telling you about. He's a character that we don't really want to say goodbye to. And so in Petipa's second version, he and Sancho simply exit off to other adventures. Now in the book, you probably know that the upshot is that basically he is defeated in a battle. It's a plot to try and restore him to his senses. And he winds up declaring that I am in my right mind. He does his will. He makes his confession. And that's how he dies, having, rejected everything that he'd been doing. I feel the same way about that as I do about the death of Dumbledore. I'm totally kind of in denial about all of that, just saying. But Petipa deliberately revised his so that Don Quixote does not die at the end of the ballet. Here is a shot from that, and you see Don Quixote spends a lot of time standing in the middle of ballerinas, and so you've got lots and lots of gorgeous dances. And if you are interested, there is a pas de deux in the final act, which is world famous. It is classic. And you can go and YouTube it, and you can see the very same moves done by different people. It really is the basic classic showing off ballet, because it's pirouettes and it's leaps and it's all kinds of wonderful things, and it's gorgeous. It's really beautiful. And just in passing, the other great choreographer who you may have heard of is Georges Balanchine. And this is Susan Farrell, who was his muse for a long time. He made a Don Quixote completely unrelated to Petipa's. And Balanchine's is rarely done anymore, but I just threw him in because we need to know he was there. All right. Let me drop out of here again for just a moment. For a little ballet. This moment, I'm going to abbreviate just a dab because I don't want to run out of time. But Don Quixote has come out to a camp of gypsies, and they're kind of tricking him. They've got a couple of people who are pretending to be the king and queen just to watch what the old man does and all of this kind of stuff. Well, they have a marionette play. And so he's sitting and he's watching this puppet show. And gradually he becomes involved with the princess who's being badly treated and the villains, and all of a sudden this puppet army of Moors shows up, and that's more than he can stand. And so he begins to lay about them with his sword. He's chopping these puppets up and cutting them off, and everybody's trying to tell him, these are puppets, cut it out. What are you doing? Now what happens in Petipa, and you'll see, is that the puppet show, these are little children doing a wonderful job, but the puppet show will conflate with the windmills here, okay? So let's get that going. The Marinsky Ballet, you don't have radio control horses. Then off the 10th Street. Let me skip forward a little bit. There's a part watch how the soldiers move. That's why I'm kind of hanging around here for a second. It's really kind of neat. Here they come. Public Army. And what happens is here, again, you thought I was kidding about this excuse for other things to go on. He goes and attacks the windmill, and he comes back all exhausted and tired, and they lay him down on the stage, and he has a dream where a lot of people come and do dances completely unrelated to anything Cervantes ever wrote. That's great. All right, Man of La Mancha brings us up, getting closer and closer. This is the musical theater version of everything we've been talking about. Quick little footnote. Man of La Mancha is really more about Cervantes than it is about Don Quixote. And what happens is Cervantes and his manservant are arrested by the Inquisition. And the play takes place in the dungeon where they're being held prior to the disposition of their case. They have some valuables that the other guys in the dungeon are going to steal from them. They have to put them on trial, though, first, in this mock sort of trial to sort of mock the Inquisition. And what Cervantes says is, let me see if I can make you change your mind about this. And so what he does is enacts the story of Don Quixote, and all the people in the dungeon are participants. And so you have this wonderful moment of Cervantes making himself up as Don Quixote as part of the action of the play. And so Don Quixote is there, Sancho Panza is there, Aldonza is there, who Don Quixote believes is Dulcinea. And so you've got all this play within the play going on, which is really quite remarkable. So it's very dark, and it has a lot to do with standing up against government oppression, any kind of oppression. It's 1966, okay? So you've got a lot of that kind of stuff in the wind. And Richard Kiley was quite remarkable. So I need to play you a couple of pieces from this to kind of make some sense out of what's going on. Al Hirschfeld's cartoon of Kiley as Don Quixote. And here he is facing the Night of the Mirrors, which in the book is the Night of the White Moon. But the Night of the Mirrors in the play, which forces him to look at himself, to see who he really is. And this is the process by which he's restored to his senses, quote unquote. It's Brian Stokes Mitchell in the most recent revival. Okay, we're not done yet. Okay, good. All right. Two things you need to hear about this one. The first of these is Richard Kiley himself singing the most famous song from the show. And you'll recognize it immediately. This was on the Tony Awards, where they got a bunch of people to come back and do their most famous things. So the fact that we have preserved this and can hear him and see him is really pretty nice. This is Richard Kiley. The song is called The Quest.
To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or forms, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. of its scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star.
Richard Kiley liked to describe.
Folks, when something's good, it stays good. All right, now that you know the quest, and that's actually the name of that song. Now that you know the quest, this is the end of the. This is a classic example of me doing things I ought not to do. I may or may not make it to the end of this. This is the end of the film version of Man of La Mancha, and Quixote is dying. He doesn't remember any of the quests. He doesn't remember any of his adventures. And Aldonza comes to help him remember. This is so cool. Okay, Sophia Loren is Aldonza. Pedro O'Toole is Don Quixote. James Coco is Sancho Panza. And this is Carrasco, if you've read the book. And all the people are hanging around here. And she's trying to make him remember what a wonderful thing he has done for her and for everybody. And it's rocking. So hang on.
Everything. My whole life. You spoke to me. And everything was different.
I spoke to you.
And you looked at me. And you called me by another name. Dulcinea. Dulcinea. Once you found a girl and called her Dulcinea. When you spoke the name, an angel seemed to whisper. Dulcinea. Dulcinea.
Then perhaps it was not a dream.
You spoke of a dream. And about the quest.
Quest.
How you must fight. And it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. If only you follow the quest.
What did I say to you? Tell me the words.
To dream. The impossible dream. Oh, they are your own words. To fight. The unmeetable foe. Don't you remember? To bear. With unbearable sorrow. You must remember. To run. Where the brave dare not go.
Right. The unrightable wrong.
Yes.
To love, pure and chaste from afar.
Yes.
To try when your arms are too weary. To reach the unreachable star.
Thank you,
My lady, this is not seemly. On your knees to me.
But my lord, you know well.
Not well. What is sickness to the body of a knight errant? What matter wounds? For each time he falls, he will rise again, and woe to the wicked! Sancho!
And woe to the wicked. And he's going to sing his song together, and then he's going to die. And it's just amazing. Okay. Don Quixote does, and then Cervantes finishes up the play at the end. All right, that being said, remember what I told you about romanticization. That is the romantic philosophy right there. To bear with unbearable sorrow, to remember the so it's marvelous stuff. So the play ends with Cervantes and his manservant being summoned by the Inquisition, and they're going up the stairs, and the woman who plays Aldonza is one of the prisoners, and she begins to sing the quest again. It's really cool, it's really romantic, but spoiler alert, Cervantes was not burned by the Inquisition. So the play leaves you in some uncertainty, but he went on to actually, I think, die in his bed. Full and happy life. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.